The emergency room was crowded, filled with the hum of machines, the distant beeping of monitors, and the low murmur of families whispering anxiously to one another, yet Ethan Cole felt more alone than he had ever been in his life. Sitting hunched over on one of the hard plastic chairs, he gripped the edge of his knees until his knuckles turned white, as if holding on to something tangible could keep him from unraveling completely. His uniform was still dirty from his janitor shift, the faded navy blue shirt stained with streaks of grease and bleach, but he hadn't cared to change, he hadn't had time. His little girl, Lily, only 7 years old, was somewhere behind those heavy ER doors, her small frame racked with fever that had refused to break for 2 days. He had rushed her here after she started convulsing in his arms, every second in the old rusted car feeling like an eternity as he prayed under his breath, whispering promises to a God he wasn't even sure listened anymore. He had always tried to be strong for Lily, hiding the weight of bills piled high on the kitchen counter, the eviction notice tucked away beneath unopened envelopes, and the gnawing hunger in his stomach when he skipped meals so she could have enough, but tonight that strength had finally cracked. His chest heaved with the effort to keep it together, yet the tears burned hot and unrelenting as they blurred his vision. Around him, other people had someone, a mother clutching her son's hand, a wife resting her head on her husband's shoulder, friends huddled together offering comfort, but Ethan had no one. His family had long turned their backs when he refused to give Lily up to foster care, and Lily's mother had walked away years ago, leaving only the faint scent of her perfume behind as the door slammed shut. Since then, Ethan had built his world around his daughter, working himself to exhaustion to give her even the smallest scraps of stability, and now, staring at the sterile white walls, he was terrified that all of it was not enough, that she would slip through his fingers despite every sacrifice he had made. He buried his face in his hands, the sound of his quiet sobs drowned out by the background noise of the ER, and for the first time in years, he didn't care who saw his pain. He was a father breaking at the seams, powerless against the cruel twists of life. His mind spun with fear and shame, imagining Lily lying alone on that hospital bed, her fevered body fighting while he sat useless outside, and every terrible thought clawed at him. What if she didn't make it? What if this was the last time he ever saw her smile? What if his best had never been good enough? He had weathered storms before, had endured nights without heat, mornings with nothing but water for breakfast, and countless moments of silent despair, but nothing compared to the agony of waiting helplessly while his child's life hung in the balance. Ethan squeezed his eyes shut and whispered to himself, "Please, let her be okay, she's all I have," but the words sounded hollow in the sterile air. The truth was, he had nothing left in him, no strength, no money, no answers, only love, raw and desperate, for the little girl who gave his life meaning. And so, in the middle of that crowded waiting room, surrounded by strangers yet utterly invisible, Ethan Cole broke down, his shoulders shaking as he let go of the tears he had held back for far too long. Ethan sat in silence, his hands still covering his face, when he became faintly aware of movement beside him, a soft rustle of fabric, the click of heels against the polished hospital floor, and then the subtle weight of someone settling into the chair next to his. At first, he thought it was just another patient's relative, someone waiting for their own loved one, but when he finally lifted his head, embarrassed by the redness in his eyes, he froze. The woman who had chosen to sit beside him looked utterly out of place in the dingy, fluorescent-lit waiting room. She was dressed in a long black coat, its fabric sleek and expensive, the kind of garment Ethan had only ever seen in storefront windows he couldn't afford to step into. A strand of her dark hair fell gracefully across her face, and when she brushed it back, her fingers bore no flashy jewelry, no loud embellishments, only simple elegance. But it wasn't her appearance that struck Ethan the most, it was her eyes, soft and steady, carrying a depth that made him feel like she could see straight through the walls he'd built around his heart. For a long moment, neither of them spoke, and Ethan shifted uncomfortably, ashamed to have been caught in his most vulnerable state. He cleared his throat, trying to sit straighter, but before he could muster an apology or excuse, she leaned ever so slightly toward him and spoke in a voice that was calm yet commanding, the kind of voice that could both soothe and disarm. "You don't have to cry alone," she said, her words neither pitying nor dismissive, but heavy with quiet conviction, as though loneliness itself was something she had once carried. Ethan blinked, unsure how to respond, the lump in his throat tightening. He wanted to tell her she didn't understand, that no one could possibly know what it felt like to be him, a man with nothing but a janitor's wage and a daughter clinging to life, but something in her gaze stopped him. It wasn't curiosity, nor was it polite concern, it was recognition, like she had seen grief before and knew its shape too well. Ethan shook his head, his voice breaking as he whispered, "My daughter, she's only 7. She's all I have. And I don't know if she's going to be okay." The woman's expression softened, though she didn't flood him with empty reassurances the way others might. Instead, she reached into her handbag with quiet purpose and pulled out a small bottle of water, unscrewing the cap and placing it gently into his trembling hands. "Then we'll wait together," she said simply, as though it were the most natural thing in the world. Ethan stared at the bottle, his throat tight, overwhelmed not by the object itself but by the act of kindness behind it. He nodded slightly, unable to speak, and for the first time in hours, he felt a presence beside him that eased the crushing weight of his solitude. Minutes passed in silence, the sounds of the ER filling the space between them, but the woman did not leave, did not shift impatiently, did not treat him as though his pain were inconvenient. Every so often, when a nurse hurried past, Ethan noticed her eyes following with a sharpness, an air of quiet authority, as if she were someone accustomed to making people move mountains at a word. He wondered who she was, what her story might be, but exhaustion tugged at his chest, dulling his curiosity. All he knew was that this stranger had given him something priceless, a moment of dignity, a reminder that he wasn't invisible, and a presence that kept the darkness at bay as he waited for news that could change his life forever. Time in the ER seemed to bend and stretch, the minutes dragging into hours, each second heavier than the last, and somewhere in that stillness Ethan found himself speaking to the woman beside him in a way he hadn't spoken to anyone in years. At first, his words came haltingly, just fragments of sentences meant to fill the silence, but she listened so intently, her dark eyes fixed on him without judgment, that soon the dam inside him broke, and his story poured out. He told her about Lily, how she had been born too soon, how fragile she had seemed in his arms when the nurses first placed her there, and how, when her mother left not long after, he had made himself a silent promise that he would never let his daughter feel abandoned again. His voice cracked as he admitted the nights he'd gone without food so Lily could eat, the times he worked until his body ached just to afford her school supplies, and the mornings he walked her to class in the same worn shoes, pretending the holes didn't matter as long as she was smiling. The woman said nothing, only nodding occasionally, her face an open canvas of empathy that seemed to absorb every word. Emboldened by her silence, Ethan confessed the fear that haunted him most, the one he never dared speak aloud, that one day Lily would grow up and see him for what he was, a man barely scraping by, a father who loved her but could never give her the life she deserved. His throat tightened as he whispered, "What if she looks at me and realizes she deserved better than me? What if love isn't enough?" For a moment, he couldn't meet the woman's eyes, ashamed of voicing the raw insecurity that kept him awake at night, but then he felt her hand gently cover his, her touch warm, steady, and grounding. When he looked up, her expression carried a weight he couldn't quite define, but her voice was soft and unshakable as she spoke. "Do you know what I see?" she asked, pausing just long enough for him to lean in despite himself. "I see a man who carries the weight of the world on his shoulders and still shows up every single day for his daughter. That makes you more than enough." The words landed in Ethan's chest with such force that for a moment he couldn't breathe. No one had ever said that to him, not Lily's mother, not his family, not even a stranger in passing, and yet here was this woman, someone who owed him nothing, looking straight into his brokenness and calling him worthy. His lips parted, but no sound came out. All he could do was blink against the tears that rose again, this time not from despair but from the fragile thread of hope her words had sparked. He leaned back in his chair, exhausted yet lighter somehow, as if a burden he hadn't realized he was carrying had been lifted, and for the first time that night, he allowed himself to believe, even briefly, that perhaps he wasn't failing as completely as he thought. Around them, the waiting room carried on, phones buzzed, children whimpered, nurses hurried. But in that small bubble of stillness, Ethan felt seen, understood, and, in a way, saved. Ethan's heart leapt when he finally saw the doctor approach, the man's expression gentle but reassuring, and before the words even formed Ethan knew there was hope. Still, when the doctor said softly, "She's stable now, the fever is breaking, and you'll be able to see her soon," relief swept through him so violently his knees nearly gave way beneath him. He pressed a trembling hand to his face as tears came again, but this time they were tears of gratitude, of overwhelming release, of a father who had feared the worst and now clung desperately to the light he'd been given. He turned to thank the woman beside him, the stranger who had carried him through the darkest hours of his waiting, but when his eyes met hers, he froze at the look she carried, poised, calm, but shadowed with something deeper. She exhaled, almost as though she had been holding back her own storm, and for the first time since she sat down, she shared a piece of herself. "I lost my husband 5 years ago," she said quietly, her gaze drifting to some distant memory, "and though he left me with more wealth than I could ever spend in a lifetime, not a single coin of it could buy me peace the night he was gone. People think money shields you from pain, but it doesn't. Grief doesn't care how much you own." Her voice wavered slightly, but she steadied it with the strength of someone who had long carried her sorrow alone. Ethan blinked, startled by the honesty in her confession, realizing she was not merely a well-dressed stranger but a woman who had lived through her own kind of breaking point. "Since then," she continued, turning her eyes back to him, "I've searched for meaning, for something that reminds me love is worth more than everything my late husband left behind. And tonight, sitting here, watching a father cry for his little girl as if the world would end without her, I found it." Ethan swallowed hard, unsure how to respond, his throat aching with words that wouldn't form, because all he could think was that this woman, who could have been anywhere, dining in glittering halls, sitting in penthouses above the city, had chosen to sit beside a broken man in an ER and remind him he wasn't invisible. She rose slowly, smoothing the fabric of her coat with graceful hands, and for a heartbeat Ethan thought she might disappear like a dream, leaving him to wonder if she had ever truly been there at all. But before she left, she leaned down just enough that her words were for him alone, her voice low, steady, and final. "Take care of your daughter, Mr. Cole. She has a father worth more than gold." And then she walked away, her steps silent yet resolute, blending into the crowd until she was gone, leaving behind only the echo of her presence and the truth of her words carved deep into his heart. Ethan sat frozen, stunned by the weight of what had just happened, his breath shallow as if he had been given something sacred. Moments later, when a nurse appeared to guide him to Lily's room, he stood on unsteady legs, but inside him something had shifted, hope had returned, dignity restored, and the crushing loneliness that had followed him for years had, for once, been replaced with the memory of a stranger's kindness. When he entered the room and saw Lily's pale but smiling face, her small hand reaching out for his, Ethan knew with absolute certainty that he had been given more than just another chance. He had been reminded that love, even in its poorest form, was still the richest gift in the world, and that as long as he had it, he would never truly be alone again.